We're going to talk first about setting up the grid and getting this set up so you can actually use the grid to help you understand real world and animation world distances. The way we change the grid is through display, grid, options. By default, it looks like this, which is pretty much useless. The first thing that I do is I change my axis color and I change my grid line number, grid and grid line numbers, so I can see the difference between subdivisions and the grid. The actual grid, see it says grid lines every 5, subdivisions 5. If I take this down to 1, you will notice, oh, that's the actual grid. It's saying please place a grid line every 5 world units. 1 world unit is equal to 1 centimeter. So if I want to do, let's say, a meter grid, I'm going to extend this. This is the range of the grid. The range the grid will go forever. No, only 1,000 centimeters. So if I say I want a grid line every 100 centimeters, I now have a meter grid. So each one of these is 1 meter. Well, a meter is roughly 3 feet. So there you've got a 1-to-1 grid, real world, that says each one of these little gray squares here is a foot approximately, and this big one is exactly a meter. That works for a 1-to-1 previz scenario. If you want to be able to get to an animation one, which we tend to work in 1/10 scale, I'm going to change the grid line to 10. And now I'm working at 1/10 scale. The sizes are still the same in my brain. Each one of these little ones is a foot. This is a meter. Now we're going to talk about Maya projects and the way that Maya projects operate. The Maya project is where we save, open, put all of our files. It's their default project structure. It's located under File, Project Window, Set Project. Their structure for their file folders looks like this. So if I wanted to make a new Maya project, I would go to File, Project Window, and bring this up. And so what it's going to do is, in this location, if I hit New, and I click here, it's going to say, hey, where do you want to make a new project? And I'm like, oh, in my malware directory. So I'm going to call it Blarg. And it's like, oh, wait, no. See? It's because it's not making the project. It's just selecting where you want to save it. Then you say, hey, I'm going to call it Blarg. And it's going to make all of these directories by default. If I hit Accept, now, if I go to File, Set Project, it opens up the same Set Project window. But now notice there's an F2 demo project. And hey, look, there's a Blarg project because it just made a new one. For now, let's just focus on you setting the project to the F2 demo project that you've downloaded from the server and placed here. I'm going to click that, and I'm going to hit Set. What you're going to notice is when I go File, Open, it automatically puts me in the Scenes folder, which is where we save everything. Okay, so there's 3 types of cameras. There's a 1-node camera, a 2-node camera, and a 3-node camera. We're not going to really deal with the 3-node camera. It's only really used in one particular instance. We're not going to handle that today. But we're going to talk about the 1-node first, and then we'll talk about the 2-node. So I'm just going to make a 1-node camera. I click Camera. First thing I do is I just scale it up a little bit so that I can see it, and then I'm going to move it out of the way, kind of put it up here. Okay, there's my camera. I usually like working like this, where I've got a 2 up and a 3rd window here, and I change this to my camera. Hey, all right, there it is. Right? But I don't actually know what I'm framing. So there's a really cool way where you can adjust and this panel view so you can see what you want. And these are these little buttons up here. Your inclination is going to be to hit this button, which looks like a little film strip. No, it's wrong. You want the resolution gate because we're working in a 16:9 ratio. If you hit the film gate, it looks different. It's also cropped. See that? So how can I get it to appear so I see the whole frame in this window? Well, you'll notice on the camera shape node over here, there's all these settings. So the first one we're going to focus on is way down here in display options. See how you turn this on? You can also up your, so depending on the size of that window, it'll adjust. And I usually take it to black, and I take this to 1. So I don't see anything outside the resolution. This is what Maya would render out exactly. If you had the film gate on, you see that they're not the same. It's got a little bit of overage on it. And we're not rendering to the film gate. We're actually rendering to the display resolution. So you want to frame your shot with the display resolution. The other thing that I tend to turn on here is safe action and safe title. I don't use both. I usually just keep safe title on because it tells me that generally I want everything that's super important to be framed in here. You can move this camera just like you could a regular camera just by doing this. But I find it much faster just to do this. To place what I want. The next thing I'm going to turn on is way up top. And it's this thing called frustum. It'll probably be collapsed. You have to open it up. And the frustum shows me what is actually in view. So you can see that as soon as that line goes past the character, he is gone. He's not in view there. See? He's not actually going to render. He's not going to show up. So I know at any given state, based off of what the focal length is, what's in view. This is really helpful in terms of understanding where you can place gear when you're doing previs for like a tech viz, to know like what you can hide, what you can't hide in the camera. The next step is going to be changing your focal length, your angle of view, and this idea of the near clipping plane. The focal length is your lens, basically your millimeter lens. It's tied to what we call the film back. Now, the film back is basically the sensor size on digital cameras nowadays, and there's a ton of options. The default film back is not a good film back to use. I actually want to use the same camera that we're using at the film school, which is a RED. And so to do that, there's a really great site. It's called visualeffectscamdb.com. And if you just search like Red Epic, Weapon 8K, whatever you want, I usually like to work with the 4K full frame. And so what you're looking for here are these 2 millimeter settings, 14.95, 7.88. Watch what happens when I change the film gate, 14.95 and 7.88. Now, what was once a 35 millimeter in Maya's default film back land is actually what a 35 millimeter is going to look like on a RED. So in order to get this to really widen out, I'm going to need to use something like an 18. This is extremely helpful. Now, it's kind of a pain in the ass. If you want to set, every time I have to go through and I have to set up all of these settings on every time I bring a new camera in, never fear. There's something called presets. Now, you will not have any of these because you haven't created them yet, but they'll allow you to do these kinds of things. Oh, I want a RED 4K. I want it to look like that. Or I want it to look like that. And what you're going to notice is you see how my display has changed, right? The resolution gate. That's because what a preset does is it captures all of the information in here. So you have to make sure you have everything set the way you want it to be set before you go and save a preset. So let's just make a new preset. I've got it set the way I want. I like it. It's great. So I'm going to go to focal length. It's going to set it at 18. And I'm just going to come up to the preset, and I'm going to go Save Camera Preset. And then I'm going to type Blarg. Well, actually, you shouldn't do Blarg. I'm going to do Red Cam, 4K, what it is, full frame, and then 18. It's probably going to tell me I have, nope. And then you go over here, and you see it, Red 4K 18. There's another one. So I just before I did Red. And you want to edit the presets. Hey, look, I can delete them. So I can go through and say delete my old one, and I hit OK, close. So now if I want to change this to the 100, if I want to fix this overscan for my 100, I actually have to come over here, type it in, and then save camera preset, retype in, make a new one. So you want to make sure you get this right for the workflow that you're doing. If I bring in another camera, create, one node, boom, there it is. Hey. And I just go preset with it selected, preset 100, boom, it's going to put it on there. There it is. But you'll notice that it didn't scale it up. So I usually have to rescale the camera, but that's about it. So it's really fast to be able to come through and say, oh, I'm just going to change what the lens is. So I can set a camera position and say, I really wonder what that would look like, you know. I wonder what that would look like with a 75. Now, the other thing that's really nice about this is that these presets work with the other camera types. So camera, two-node camera, a camera and aim. They call it a two-node camera because there's two nodes. Actually, there's three technically. There's a group node, camera, aim. So the first thing I'm going to do when it creates it is I'm going to, again, scale it up so I can actually see it. Move it out of the way. And I'm not going to rotate or anything like that. I just want to kind of get my general position so I can see it. Now I want you to notice what this looks like. It's camera 3. And I'm going to click my camera, and I'm going to change my preset. Boom. Now it's important that if you try to put the preset there, you'll notice there isn't one. So the preset is based off of whatever you have selected. So you can make presets on anything. So these presets are only saved just for cameras. So with that selected, I can change it. Now watch what happens when I grab the aim and just kind of move it around. Whoa. So I can control where the camera's looking from a fixed point of view. The two-node is used to be able to get really complex camera moves. You think it makes sense to use it for things like just a simple tilt up, but if it's a locked off camera and you're just framing it and it's just this angle, a one node is far easier to use immediately, quickly. The only time you ever really want to use a two node is when you have a very specific like tracking pan or a tracking tilt. It's just easier to animate with. Or if you have a very complex dolly and track kind of move where you have two nodes moving. So an example of this would be something like so our next step is going to be play blasting. And for now, I'm going to start just with this camera by itself for a second because I want to show you some viewport renderer settings. So this is, your wireframe. This is your shade. This is your texture. And this is light. So it's already pre-lit. It's already pre-textured for you. So that's 4, 5, 6, and 7. Notice behind here, though, the background's gray, which is kind of annoying. So there's a really interesting setting, hotkey setting in Maya. If you do Alt-B, you can cycle through the different types of backgrounds. So by default, I think it's gray, or it might even be that. When I'm doing play blasts, I like to work with black so that I can hide whatever I need. The next setting that you need to think about are these up here. So you can see you can control this stuff up here if you want. Texture, light, shadow. Something we call ambient occlusion, which is essentially grounding shadows. So you'll see how it gets a little soft. motion blur, and anti-aliasing. All of these have settings, and the settings can be found with inside Renderer Viewport 2.0 options. So right off the bat, the first thing you're going to see is a light limit. And so it'll only allow you to use up to 16 lights. So when we get into actually lighting in this space, I'll walk you through this. But for now, I just jack it up to 16. I usually do. I'm not going to worry about the transparency settings for now because for this exercise, you don't need them. And then in order to change these other settings, so screen space ambient occlusion, so you can enable it, turn it off. Just want to show you what it does. And you can change, essentially this is the blur of it, right? And then filter radius, so you can get it really tight. And then you have samples. The next one is anti-aliasing, which is down here. And you can go all the way up to 16. You know, if you turn it, you can see that it gets a little chunky. So just to make this a little easier to see, I will turn down the... There you go. So now watch what happens when it gets much softer. Then you have motion blur. Now motion blur is interesting because it's useful. So she's moving. As soon as I turn it on, watch. And I joggle the frame a little bit. You get a little blur there. So if you're going to use it, take the count up. And it tends to, help a little bit, but it can also be a little distracting. So if I switch back over to my moving camera, it'll also take the camera's movement into consideration. See how everything's slightly blurry? So when it plays, you're going to get a lot of blur. So you have to kind of like feel out what feels like too much blur. This is useful in previs when you have like really like fast action oriented scenes. With something like this, I tend to just to leave a little bit on and just to put so it gives it a little bit more of an edge or softens it a little bit as it moves. It doesn't feel so edgy.
What happened to you performing at your little thing tonight? You not going?
So your next step, once you have this stuff set up the way you want it, is to actually play blast it. So what play blasting is going to do is it's going to screen capture this. So right before you play blast, the thing I usually do is I make a full window like this, and I drop my overscan to like 1, 2, something like that. All right. So then I'm going to go over here, play blast, right click on the time slider, play blast options. And by default, it looks like this, which none of these are good. So you leave these two things on. I would suggest that you do look up help on play blast options so you understand what everything here is. But for now, these are the settings I use. I go to QuickTime, and then I use H.264, wherever the heck it is. There it is. I usually jack this to 100. And instead of using display size, I'm going to force what resolution I want to output it at. For our intents and purposes, you can use 960 by 540. Sometimes I go a little higher, which is 1280 by 720. And if it's for a final output, I might actually even use 1920 by 1080. But for this exercise, I'm just going to use 960 by 540. Scale, if I leave this at 0.5, it's going to divide 960 by 540 in half. So it'll give you like, 4 something and 3 something, as opposed to 1, which will give you an exact scale of 100%, 960 by 540. Okay, great. And I'm going to save the file. Now, I don't need, it's going to name it, it's going to try to play blast it the name of the actual scene file. So this is 11 class sequencing. So I'm going to change that. I also want you to notice that by default, hey, look, there's one already there. By default, it puts the movie in the movies folder of the project that you have set. So I know that's the right place. I'm just going to change the name of this. We're just going to call it shot 1. And because there's one already there, watch what happens. Do you want to overwrite it? Sure, because I know that I want to overwrite that movie. Now, there's one fatal mistake I made. And that is, I didn't set the range of how much I wanted to play blast. So right now, it's going to play blast a movie that's 2,500 frames long. You're like, oh no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Okay, well, never fear. If you hit the escape key, it'll cut out right there, wherever you hit the escape key. Now, you've got a movie, but it's got a blank spot in it. And it did capture the sound.
Performing at your little thing tonight. You're not going?
So usually I don't keep this. What I do is I go back and I say, okay, I'm going to use the range slider to pick what I want to play blast. And then I go back through, play blast options, make sure everything looks the way I want it to look. I'm going to read right over top of it. So I'm like, okay, great. Maybe this time, you know what? I'm going to do it bigger than the window. 1280 by 720, just to see what happens. Play blast. Yep, overwrite. And so now it's going to go through the same thing, play blast it out. And you should see it pop up in the frame. Hey, there it is. And what I want you to notice is that the 1280 by 720, it kept the black border. See this? So if you want to crop it so that it's flush with the resolution gate, you don't want the resolution gate on, right? So here you go. So it's got sound.
What happened to you performing at your little thing?
If you want to get rid of so if you don't want this border when you play blast, you have to turn overscan to 1 and turn off display gate in order to get it to work. Play blast. This time though, 960 by 540. And then we're going to do it again, and I'm going to overwrite it. Now you can see the crop line. See it right there? Right there. So you know that it's actually capturing the right thing. So you've got to turn off overscan, and you have to turn off display resolution gate in order to get a clean export of what the frame is going to be.